Welcome to the Rotary Club of York. We are change makers committed to service above self and the four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? If you haven't already done so, please silence your cell phones. Steve Feldman will lead us virtually in our opening song, America, My Country, 'Tis of Thee, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Eric Chase will offer the invocation, and Sarah Austin will introduce our visitors.
Rotarians, please join me. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you would prepare yourself in a way in which you're accustomed to prayer, let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for the blessing of our life, the chance to be here today with friends, business associates, and colleagues. Thank you for our safe arrival, this meal, and those who have prepared and served it. Our guests and our speaker, Senator Toomey, in his role as the servant leader in the U.S. government for our state and community, and in his leadership in the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. Help us to make productive use of our time together here at Rotary and each setting where we find ourselves today. Grant us wisdom, peace, and a sense of gratitude for the many opportunities and things that we have. Guide us as Rotarians as we continue to place service above ourselves. For all this, we are grateful today. Amen.
Good morning or good afternoon. It's been a long time since I've been behind this podium, and last time it was at the other end of the room, a literal different worldview. I am pleased today to have the honor of introducing our guests. They are sharing our worldview. When I call your name as a guest, please stand and remain standing until President Jackie has welcomed you. We do not have any visiting Rotarians today. We have Mark Ilfelder, who is the guest of Ray Rosen. Casey French, the guest of Jane Schuessler. Steve Stewart, guest of Dan May. We have Miss Pennsylvania, Megan Sinisi, who is the guest of past President Brian Tate. Rachel Stockslager, guest of Student Education. Karen Stockslager, guest of Student Education. Greg Stockslager, guest of Student Education. Eric Barshinger, guest of Jake Miller. Alyssa Barsinger, guest of Jake Miller. Don Curry, guest of Jim May. Naomi Morales, guest of Chris Topp. Bob Riley, guest of Andy Siebold. And Norman Humber, guest of past President John Kleinditz.
Esteemed visitors, we are so grateful to see you today. What a great room. We hope that you find this program very informative and that you will plan to visit us again often. And Casey, we look forward to getting an application in your hand and having you rejoin. Rotarians, please help me welcome our visiting guests today. Beloved Rotarian and friend Arlington Cayley passed away last Wednesday evening, August 18th. He would have been 99 on September 15th. Art has been an active member of the Rotary Club of York since joining in May of 2002. In 2020, he was awarded member emeritus status. Prior to joining our club, Art was a member of the Red Lion Rotary Club for 15 years and was a past president of the club. Art was a World War II veteran, York Suburban High School teacher and band director when the school opened in 1958, and leader of the World Touring Pennsylvania Ambassadors of Music. In 2012, in celebration of Art's 90th birthday, his family and friends founded and funded the Rotary Club of York's Art Cayley Rising Musician Scholarship. This $1,000 scholarship is awarded to a senior student from William Penn or York Suburban High School planning to major in music. A future memorial date will be determined by the family, and they've asked in lieu of flowers if you'd like to remember Art's life and work, contributions may be made to the Rotary Club of York Art Cayley Rising Musician Scholarship. Today we mourn his passing. However, his legacy lives on in the scholarship of which he was so proud. In a musical truism, the song has ended, but the melody lingers on. May we please have a moment of silence now in memory of Art. We are altering our meeting format today and plan to continue with the announcements and presentations following our speaker's remarks. And now past President Mike Summers will introduce our program.
Man, that's the best looking president I've known. I get brownie points for that, I think. Our speaker today is United States Senator Pat Toomey, and this is Pat's fourth time in visiting us as our club. As he came in 2009 as a candidate, and returned as promised to be as our sitting U.S. Senator and visited us in 2013, again in 2016, and he joins us again today. Pat was valedictorian of his high school class, and his dedication, discipline as a student earned him entry into Harvard University. Upon graduating from Harvard, Pat spent 6 years working in the international capitals markets in the financial services field, and he followed that with becoming an entrepreneur, starting a successful family-owned restaurant business with his two younger brothers. In 1997, Pat successfully ran and won the open seat representing Pennsylvania's 15th congressional district for 3 consecutive terms. In office, Pat was one of Congress's leading advocates for limited government and personal freedoms. He led efforts to expand tax cuts and reduce wasteful spending. Honoring a campaign pledge, Pat did not seek re-election after his 3rd term. Following his service in Congress, Pat served as president of the limited government free enterprise advocacy organization, the Club for Growth. Pat was elected to the United States Senate in the fall of 2010 on a platform of making our Commonwealth and our country a safer, more prosperous place to live, work, and raise a family. Sought out by his colleagues for his views on financial reform and taxation policy, Senator Toomey helped author the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the first comprehensive overhaul of the tax code since the 1980s. The reform included in this bill, coupled with common sense deregulation, helped bring about the strongest economy in a generation. Senator Toomey is the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee. He's also a member of the Senate Finance and Budget Committees. Pat lives in Zionsville, PA with his wife, Chris, and they are proud parents of 3 children. While we welcome all the guests that have joined us today, following this presentation, the senator will entertain questions, and we ask that only members of the Rotary Club of York ask those questions. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please warmly welcome United States Senator Pat Toomey.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Mike, thank you for that kind introduction. You know, when you go through all these things that I've done, I'm reminded of what my father-in-law says about me sometimes. You know, the guy just can't keep steady work. But I'm grateful for the chance to be back. I've enjoyed every one of my visits to the York Rotary Club. I was never a member of the Rotary Club in Allentown, where my family and I have lived either in or just near Allentown for many years now. But I was a member of the Sertoma Club. And I think I've figured out the difference between the Sertoma Club and the Rotary Club. You guys are much better singers than we ever were. So what I thought I'd do today is kind of give you my take on three of the big front burner things that you've been reading about, that we have all been following, either in Washington or elsewhere. Three big front burner things, and then I'm looking forward to conversation, Q&A discussion that we can have afterwards. So the three things I wanted to touch on are: one, the infrastructure bill that passed the Senate and now awaits action in the House. Then I want to talk a little bit about the $3.5 trillion, but it's actually a lot more than that, Bernie Sanders budget that is begun to work its way through the legislative process. And then finally, a little bit about Afghanistan before we get to our conversation. So let me start with infrastructure and start with observing that I think you can make a pretty good case that we have specific needs that could justify increasing the federal investment from about $100 billion a year that the federal government routinely spends on various kinds of physical infrastructure. I think you can make a case for increasing that in a variety of ways. However, the bill that came out of the Senate, in my view, spends way too much money, spends a lot of money in areas that it shouldn't be spending money, and it's not offset. And I think that's an important problem as well. That's why I did not support this bill. Let me just give you a quick example of each of these considerations. In the category of spending too much money, consider, if you will, one slice of this bill, but I think this is in some ways typical of how far this ended up going off the rails, if you'll forgive the pun, and that is the mass transit piece of this. So the federal government contributes about $13 billion a year to the various mass transit agencies around the country. That's the routine subsidy that the federal government provides for the subway and buses and light rail systems around the country. 13 billion, 1-3. In the 12 months ending, let's say, April of this year, in addition to the $13 billion that we would routinely have sent anyway, because of all of the COVID-related bills, the federal government sent an additional 70 billion, 70, for a total of $83 billion, which turns out is much more than the combined operating and capital budgets of every single transit agency for a full year in the United States of America. That's how much it was so much money that as of today, collectively, the transit agencies of America are sitting on about $40 billion that they just can't even spend, because it's not even physically possible to spend that much money that quickly. So that's how much we spent. In the infrastructure bill, there's another $107 billion for transit. No obligations that anybody rethink the long-term secular decline in ridership that they're all experiencing. Nobody think about any kind of reforms to put them on a sustainable, fiscally sustainable path. Just have another $100 billion plus or minus. I think that's a problem. Then you have the category of how we're spending money on things that I don't think my constituent taxpayers need to be spending money on. For instance, there's $7.5 billion for electric vehicle charging stations. Now, yeah, I wasn't actually there at the time, but when we were building the federal highway system in the 1950s, I'm pretty sure the federal government wasn't building the gas stations, for the obvious reason that people who own and operate gas stations can recover their investment, they can get a return on their capital, and so the private sector is quite happy to provide service stations. Well, you could call this $7.5 billion the Tesla gift, because that's what Tesla does. They're funding electric vehicle charging stations all across the country. I mean, they're at Wawa's and Sheetz and all kinds of other places. They're rolling out because There's an investment opportunity. Why should federal taxpayers be footing the bill for this? Or the $60 billion for the power grid. I've talked to CEOs of power companies across Pennsylvania. There's not a one of them who's told me they can't raise capital for needed projects. They can raise capital and they can get a return on that capital. So why does the federal government have to be paying for this? Or the $172 million for the Pacific Salmon Conservancy. Now, it might be a very good idea to have conservation measures for the Pacific salmon. Is that infrastructure? Does the federal government have to be doing it? There's $500 million for tree planting, $1 billion to demolish racist highways. And the list goes on and on. That's a whole category of objection I have, this inappropriate spending. And then there's the fact that it's not paid for. This is most of this, over $1 trillion over the next several years from this bill. It's just going to be borrowed, or the Federal Reserve will print the money, because that's what we've been doing. And that's what's going to happen with this. I was one of a group of 6 Republicans who went to the White House to pitch the president on a different idea for an infrastructure bill. It would have been smaller. It would have been exclusively physical infrastructure. And an important part of my pitch to the president was we should pay for it by repurposing money that we have already approved in prior bills, but haven't spent, because it was so much money. People can't spend it that quickly. So rather than spend it wastefully, why don't we repurpose it for infrastructure? I did not win that argument with the president. That's another real concern I have. The other point I would make is that this bill needs to be considered in the context of everything else we've been doing. And we have been spending trillions and trillions of dollars. It's hard to even wrap your brain around $1 trillion, 1,000 billion. And it's like every couple of months now, there's another multi-trillion-dollar bill. Don't get me wrong. In the peak of the COVID crisis, I thought we needed a massive federal government spending program. We needed to replace lost income because we were shutting down our economies all over the country. I voted for those bills. I have helped write parts of some of them. But, you know, this isn't April 2020 anymore. Our economy is in a totally different place. And yet we're still spending money by the trillions, all of which is borrowed or printed. That brings me to the next one that's coming at us, which is it's advertised as a $3.5 trillion budget resolution. Now, I got to tell you, this is an amazing thing. I'm pretty sure Bernie Sanders did not win the Democratic primary for president, but you wouldn't know it if you look at what's happening in the United States Senate. And this is a case in point. It's described as $3.5 trillion, but that is extremely misleading, to put it mildly. And the reason I say that is because what the programs they contemplate are designed to create new entitlements, new payment streams to Americans, and then suddenly end in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. Nobody thinks they're actually going to end. And once people become accustomed to receiving payments from the federal government on a regular basis, let me tell you, it's very, very hard to convince Congress to go ahead and allow that to terminate. And if you simply assume that these programs continue for the full 10-year budget window for which we normally account for these things, it becomes well over $5 trillion. And this is all total new spending above and beyond all the massive spending that we ordinarily engage in. This one has with it a huge menu of tax increases. You've seen some of them. The basic purpose is to undo the 2017 tax reform, which I believe was an extremely constructive tax reform and helped us get to the strongest economy we've had in my lifetime just before the COVID pandemic hit. This next piece of legislation, a combination of the spending and the tax increases, it would undo much of that tax reform. Corporate rate goes up to 28%. It imposes a huge new global tax, which I think will lead to a resurgence of inversions. Remember that before our tax reform, all the American multinational companies that would invert to establish their headquarters somewhere else because we had the least competitive tax code in the world. Capital gains rate almost doubles to 40% under this plan. Death tax comes back strong. Anything over $1 million, you lose the step up in basis. The top marginal rate goes up to 40%. This is just a handful of the things that are coming in this tax proposal. But maybe the most important thing, and this is something I want to stress this point. The bill is often described in the media as the anti-poverty portion of the president's agenda. Sometimes it's meant to distinguish it from the physical infrastructure portion. That is a terrible mischaracterization of what this bill is all about. This bill is not an anti-poverty bill. One way that I think about some of the big movements of the progressive movement over the 20th century, right? There were two massive expansions in the role of the federal government in our society. One was the New Deal, right? When FDR, in response to the Great Depression and a 25% unemployment rate, decided that the federal government should provide money for people who, for whatever reason, temporarily could not work. So Social Security was meant for people who were too old to work. There was a program for widows who had young children to look after and who therefore probably wouldn't be able to join the workforce. There was unemployment insurance for people who were out of work when there were no jobs to be had. So the idea, at least one of the animating ideas of the New Deal, was to provide a safety net for people who could not work. The next great movement, it seems to me, you could say would be Johnson's Great Society program in the late 60s, really fully funded in the early 70s. And that was a different animating idea. That idea was, we want to eradicate abject poverty in this country. We want people who live in terrible circumstances. We want to provide a lot of money to alleviate the misery of living in abject poverty. And so you had all of these different programs that were designed and targeted for very poor people to alleviate that suffering. What President Biden has in mind is something as revolutionary as these first two. It is to make the middle class dependent on government. It is to systematically have the federal government step in and pay the bills that we ordinarily would assume that a family takes responsibility for. And in many cases, these programs have no income limit. Doesn't matter how much you make, they're universal entitlements to these programs. These are things like expanding Medicare to everyone over 60. 90% of Americans who are over 60 would qualify in this program. 90% already have health insurance. Why do we have to put them in the Medicare program? They want to send a monthly check to everyone. If you have a child, you have another child, you get another check. Paid family leave, universal free pre-K, free child care, free community college. The list goes on. And in many cases, these programs either have no income limit at all, such as some of the healthcare expansions, or they begin to get reduced, but not until your income is like over $150,000. Several times the median income. These are not anti-poverty programs. This is meant to change the fundamental relationship of middle income, successful Americans and the federal government. Not a good idea. You'll be shocked to learn. I don't think it's a good idea. But this is on the agenda. Last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is what's happening in Afghanistan. This is an unmitigated disaster. If a lot of Americans, probably a majority of Americans, think that it's appropriate for us to withdraw from Afghanistan, I think you can actually make a very strong case for why a very modest number of Americans staying behind would be in our interest. But be that as it may, the execution of this has been a disaster. It's been incompetent. It's going to have adverse consequences. I think there's a danger of really lasting damage to America's reputation, to our standing, and to our credibility with our allies. it really looks, it's hard not to see where we are today as having put ourselves in a position where the Taliban of all people are deciding which Americans are going to be able to get out of the country. And they have already announced that our Afghan allies who risk their lives and their families' lives to help us in this effort as translators and other facilitators, Taliban has said, oh, they don't get to leave. How the greatest power on the face of the earth is at the mercy of the whims of those people is unbelievable to me. And I think disastrous for our leadership of the free world. There's a lot of damage has been done, but it is not too late for the president to ensure a couple of things. And I think he has an obligation to do that. And that is, we provide whatever resources it takes, and we do whatever it takes for however long it takes to get every single American out of Afghanistan. And to ensure that the Afghans who risked everything to work alongside us are afforded the same treatment. It is still within our ability to do that. And I think we have a moral obligation to do that. So with all that, what's the good news? Now that I've kind of ruined your lunch. So a couple of things that I'm encouraged by. First of all, Bernie Sanders is not going to get his entire wish list. The process is a very peculiar one, but these budget resolutions that have passed now, both the Senate and the House, provide the opportunity for our Democratic colleagues to pass that entire wish list with just 50 votes in the Senate. But there's no assurance that they've got the 50 votes. And in fact, I think that there are at least 2 Democratic senators that will not go along with that entire package. And so while I do think there will be some damaging tax increases and some wildly inappropriate spending programs, I think the scale will be considerably less than what the budget resolution makes possible. I can't be sure of that, but the dilemma for our Democratic colleagues who have made it clear that they intend to do this on a strictly party line basis, they need every single last Democrat in the Senate. They only have 50. They need all 50. And then they need Kamala Harris to come in and break the tie, which she will do. But they need the 50 first. And so that's why I think this will be streamlined somewhat. It'll be reduced. It also, there's something else happening. There's another silver lining in the infrastructure bill that passed. And I think it almost guarantees that we will not see the elimination of the filibuster in the Senate, not in this Congress anyway. And I think that's really, really important. The fact that 17 Republicans joined with all the Democrats to pass it makes it pretty hard to make the argument that it's impossible to pass legislation. I think it's hard to make that case when you consider the great COVID-related relief bills of last year passed almost unanimously. Several of them were unanimous. I think that makes it pretty hard to make that case. But suffice it to say that given their central role in negotiating it, Senator Sinema from Arizona, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, I think it's very, very unlikely that they would support eliminating the 60 vote threshold that is the norm in the Senate, given that the Senate has recently demonstrated the way it can function. And what does that mean? That means, among other things, we don't see new states being added to the union for the sake of partisan gain. We won't see the Supreme Court being packed to whatever number it takes to get a liberal outcome. It means the federal takeover of elections isn't going to happen. So we will dodge the worst excesses of what some on the left would like to do. And then we're going to have an election in 2022. And about that, I will simply say this. I am reminded of the wisdom of the great Winston Churchill, who said about all of us, he said, you know, you can always count on the Americans to get it right after they've exhausted every other possible option. Well, we're almost through exhausting the other options, and I think pretty soon we'll be getting it right. So with that, why don't I open the floor to questions, comments, your thoughts? Yes, sir. Yeah. Briefly, I can. I've been so consumed. I'm sorry. Yes, the question is, speaking of debacles, could I comment on the situation at the southern border? And honestly, our focus has shifted so much to what's happening in Afghanistan. And we're getting calls in my office every day from American citizens on the ground in Afghanistan, the Afghans who have the documentation to prove that they did in fact work for US forces, but they can't get to the airport. So this has been quite distracting. But the reality is we have a full-blown crisis at our southern border. In the month of July, we had the largest number of apprehensions of people illegally coming across the border in 20 years. I think the number may be 10 times what it was about a year or so ago. This is a huge problem. And I just don't think the administration has come to grips with it yet. But we absolutely have to do that. The administration likes to focus on what they consider to be the root causes, and the root causes in their minds are this combination of crime and corruption and poverty in the Northern Triangle countries. I'm sure there's a lot of crime and corruption and bleak economic prospects in those countries, but that takes a long time to fix, and it's not necessarily even in our power to fix it. We've got to make sure we secure that border. The question in the back. Yeah, so that's a great question. First of all, I look back at what happened last year, and I think we made some decisions we certainly, I hope, wouldn't do again, right? The shutdown of the entire economy, when it became increasingly clear that this is a very dangerous disease for people who are vulnerable to it, right? We had a majority of all our deaths occurred inside the walls of nursing homes. And to tell a healthy 25-year-old that you can't go to work, that was a mistake. Now, at the time, we didn't fully know, right? So out of an abundance of caution, there was measures were taken that were very extreme. They did a lot of harm. We know that now. The last thing we should do is replicate those mistakes. I think vaccines are a very good idea. I've been vaccinated. My family's been vaccinated. I encourage everyone to get vaccinated. If you've been vaccinated, honestly, I'm not convinced that mask wearing is really all that terribly necessary, but that should be the discretion of the owners of establishments and the places that are free to set their own parameters in that regard. But now I think there's been some encouraging news that the worst of the Delta variant may well be behind us. Fortunately, in Pennsylvania, we have not been hit nearly as hard as a number of states. And in my regular communications with the folks running hospital systems across Pennsylvania, the great news is we've not had a massive surge. Obviously, we've had an uptick, but we've not had a massive surge of people who've been tested positive. But we've also not had a massive surge in hospitalizations, in part because we can treat this now. We have much better ability to treat this than we did a year from now. So I hope we'll be sensible in our mitigation. And the most sensible thing I think we can do is to encourage people to get vaccinated. Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. So the question was, having mentioned that the filibuster probably remains intact, what is the danger that the massive spending and tax increase bill passes by virtue of the mechanism of reconciliation? That's exactly how it's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen. And that's why the budget resolution passed, the Senate and the House passed an identical measure, because the whole reason for this procedure and these votes is to allow the Democrats to pass a subsequent bill with a simple majority vote. So that's going to happen. And that's one of the realities of Senate rules. The filibuster, the 60 vote threshold for passing most forms of legislation. It's just that, it's most forms, but not all. And major spending bills and tax policy can be done through a mechanism that requires only a simple majority. That's what our Democratic colleagues are going to do, but they'll need to hold every last one of the 50 Democrats.
Senator Toomey, just a quick question from someone watching online. We have about 40 members online right now. The question is, when will our federal government realize that the only way for the country to move forward is for Republicans and Democrats to work together? What is being done to begin the work towards compromising on some of these issues?
Yeah, look, that's part of why you got to keep the filibuster. Remember, when President Trump was elected, Republicans had complete control of the elected government. We had a majority in the House, we had a majority in the Senate, we had the White House. And President Trump routinely beat up Republican senators for not being willing to get rid of the filibuster, because he wanted us to just jam through whatever we wanted to do on simple majority votes. And we said, no, Mr. President, we're not going to do that because it's not good for the country. It's not good for the country because as soon as you do that, then you have a strict majoritarian rule. You don't have a consensus. You have no bipartisan buy-in, and you increase. Look, the day will come, we told the president, when the Democrats have complete control of the elected government. Happened sooner than I'd hoped, but we knew that day would come. And we thought, let's not establish that precedent. And that's one of the things that's so important about the filibuster. It's very seldom in American history that either party has 60 votes or more. It did happen early in the Obama years. The Democrats did. Republicans haven't in 100 years, haven't had 60 votes. And the fact that to pass major legislation usually requires 60 votes requires us to get a consensus. And that makes the legislation more enduring. I would cite 2020. As I said during my opening remarks, we passed, I think, 4 or 5, maybe 6 major pieces of legislation, including unprecedented legislation, to deal with the crisis that we were facing. And it was all bipartisan. So when the chips were down and we were in an emergency, people came together. We passed these bills generally unanimously. Now, I'm not diminishing the political polarization. That's real. And that's I don't think there's an obvious or easy solution to that. But I would suggest that we have demonstrated the ability to govern when it was essential. Yes, ma'am.
What is the responsibility of the Americans in Afghanistan who were warned 30 days ago, if not more, to get out of Afghanistan and could not leave that church? Is that other people's responsibility? That's number one. And the second one is, I could be wrong, but I seem to recall that Republicans removed the filibuster in order to pack the courts. Is that incorrect?
Okay, let me address these sequentially here. Look, certainly with hindsight, okay, so the question number one was, what is the level of responsibility of the Americans in Afghanistan who were warned 30 days ago that they should leave and chose not to leave? And then did the Republicans get rid of the filibuster in order to pack the court? So on the first one, look, I think we'd all agree it would have been a good decision to get out. But in fairness, I don't think that they were given the impression that we were going to have a disastrous evacuation of American forces precipitously and suddenly. And there was an expectation that the government in Kabul could hang on for some extended period of time. They were wrong. Most of us were wrong about the speed with which the Afghan government collapsed. But I certainly wouldn't say that as a result of that, we should just leave them behind. On the filibuster, let me complete the history a little bit if I could. So it used to require 60 votes to confirm a nominee to either the judiciary or the executive branch. During the early years of the Obama administration, the many court cases were not going the way President Obama wanted them to go, especially when certain Obama administration regulations were challenged in the courts. And specifically, the final stop for most of these challenges would be the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And the DC Circuit Court of Appeals was often, not always, but often ruling against the administration on some contentious rulemakings. So The DC Circuit Court of Appeals did not have a particularly heavy workload, and they were not understaffed, but the Democrats did not like the decisions that they were making. So Harry Reid came to the Republicans and said, we want you to confirm 3 new judges to the Third Circuit. And it was clear what the purpose was. That was to shift the balance so they would get the decisions they wanted. That was the court packing exercise. And we said, no, we're not going to go along with that. That's not the role we should play in this confirmation process. And when we refused, we Republican senators, I was there at the time, Harry Reid said, I will then change the rules of the Senate so that it takes only a simple majority to confirm all federal appointees except the vacancies on the Supreme Court. It was convenient for him. There were no vacancies on the Supreme Court at the time. And so that's what they did. So I would argue that it was Harry Reid who got rid of the filibuster, the 60 vote threshold for confirming judges. When the vacancy occurred on the Supreme Court and our Democratic colleagues insisted that they not fill it, then we extended that to include Supreme Court nominees, as Harry Reid had already extended it to all other court officials. So it is now the case that confirmations, and this is both administrative, embassy ambassadors, as well as judges, are confirmed with a simple majority. But there has never been an attempt thus far to get rid of the 60 vote threshold for legislation, only for confirmation. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yeah. So the question is, can we talk about the debt ceiling? So we have a peculiar mechanism, which is we establish, and this is under existing law, there's a limit to how much money the federal government can borrow. It's a statutory dollar amount. And when we get close to that, since we're still running deficits every year, the federal government has to borrow the money to be able to spend, to engage in deficit spending in the future. You have to raise the debt ceiling in order to borrow that money. It's long been my view that since we are on an unsustainable fiscal trajectory, the federal government systematically spends more money than we can afford to spend, that we ought to use the occasion of this moment, which occurs periodically when we bump up against the ceiling, to negotiate some kind of agreement. And past big budget deals, whether it was Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan on Social Security, Bill Clinton in the early 90s, these big bipartisan deals have historically been structured at the time when the votes are needed to raise the debt ceiling. We are rapidly approaching the point at which we will bump up against this borrowing limit. Our Democratic colleagues refuse to engage in any kind of discussion about structural fiscal reforms that would put us on a sustainable path. In fact, they're determined to make it much, much worse with these massive spending bills that they're currently contemplating. And so we've said to them, look, guys, you have the ability to raise the debt ceiling yourself. And they do. It's through the reconciliation process, the same mechanism that allows them to pass spending and tax increases also happens to permit a simple majority vote to raise the debt ceiling. And so we've made it clear, if they're going to engage in this kind of spending and not negotiate any structural reforms, they can raise the debt ceiling themselves. So what I think they'll do is have a vote without using this reconciliation device, the 50 vote majority tool. It will fail because Republicans will not support the debt ceiling increase under these circumstances. And then they will come back having modified the budget resolution, given themselves the reconciliation tool, and they'll pass it with a simple majority vote. That's what I think is going to happen. Yes, sir. Okay. Yep.
Next year, there are currently 3 Senate seats that are seen as being toss-ups. One big open seat, Pennsylvania,
Yep.
an open seat, North Carolina, and then Senator Johnson's seat, Wisconsin.
Right.
What level of anxiousness is there with the Republican Party right now that there could be ground loss as far as the balance of power?
You know, it's a great question. And for people who are following it closely, I think anyone who's being honest will tell you, you know, it's hard to know. There's a pretty high level of anxiety on both sides, right? Because I agree with you completely. Those are 3 tough seats, the toughest Republican held seats. Wisconsin will be tough whether or not Ron Johnson decides to run for re-election, and I don't know what he'll do there. I will say the There's a lot of evidence that the basic political dynamic is looking favorable for Republicans, as it typically does during a midterm when the other party is in the White House. But we don't know how that's going to change over the course of the next year or so. But I would also point out that I think there are Democrat-held seats that are vulnerable as well. So the Georgia Warnock seat in Georgia is certainly a significant pickup opportunity for Republicans. Mark Kelly in Arizona. Arizona is a state that can easily swing either way. And if the political environment favors Republicans generally, that could put that race very much in play. I think Nevada could be competitive, and New Hampshire. Both of those Democrat-held seats could be competitive. So they've got 2 to 4. We've got probably 3. And ultimately, I think it depends on the political environment we're in November of 2022 and which candidates emerge from primaries. Right? Candidates matter, and there's not a lot of clarity certainly on our side, and there's a lot of question marks on the other side as well. So I think we'll be watching that really closely right down to the end. All right. I think last one, this gentleman's right there. Yes, sir. Yeah. So the question is, what do I think of mail-in votes and ballot harvesting? So mail-in. So I kind of like the system that Pennsylvania had for what, I don't know, a couple of 100 years or something. You had to go and vote, and if you couldn't be at your voting place for whatever reason, then you would give your reason. You'd submit the application. You'd get your mail-in ballot. I voted both ways many times. I'm okay with that. We have a much more liberal process. I'm okay with that too. But the more you go down that road of allowing mail-in ballots and other mechanisms other than in-person voting, the more you introduce some risk of some misbehavior. So my preference would not be to have universal unlimited mail-in ballots. That'd be my preference. But that's a decision, of course, that gets made and should be made by the state legislature. Ballot harvesting is an invitation for troublemaking. Ballot harvesting is when a paid campaign operative goes into an apartment building or a nursing home and comes out with a stack of maybe a couple of 100 ballots all filled out. And I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if they tend to be all filled out the same way. And then they get turned in. I think that's a recipe for trouble. And some states encourage ballot harvesting. Other states forbid it. I think the states ought to be able to make that decision. My own view, I hope that Pennsylvania will not permit ballot harvesting. Thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you, Senator Toomey, for taking time away from your very busy schedule to be with us today to offer your insights into Washington and for your many years of service for our nation and for our state. The senator signed the book plate in the book Fly High, John Glenn, The Story of an American Hero by Kathleen Kroll, which will be given to Martin Library. The Charitable Endowment Fund Board has approved a disaster relief grant of $5,000 to Haiti, which recently experienced a devastating 7.2 magnitude earthquake, as well as heavy damage from Tropical Storm Grace just a few days later. The approved funding relief will be through Shelterbox USA, a partner organization to Rotary International, which will provide the support needed for rescue and restoration. If you'd like to make a gift toward the relief efforts, please contact Lynn or Renee. We have a special congratulations to President-elect Glenn Miller on the birth of his very first grandchild. He has a granddaughter. Congratulations, Glenn. We want to also offer our congratulations to Michael Reichman because he has recently been selected to the Central Penn Business Journal's 40 Under 40. And that just shows you we do have a lot of youngins in this club. It's a beautiful thing. So congratulations, that takes place in October. The fundraising committee will meet on September 1st at 11 a.m. here at the club. And the following committees will also meet on September 1st here at the club immediately following our lunch meeting. The membership committee also via Zoom, the Service Above Self Committee, and the Educational Vocational Guidance Committee. And now for our member moment. Sonam Ruitt joined the club in 2015, and his proposer was Marcia Bourne. However, it was Elliot Weinstein who first approached Sonam about joining the club after reading an article in the York Daily Record about the work Sonam did in Nepal following a major earthquake. Sonam made it his mission to collect medical supplies and monetary contributions from area hospitals and physicians' offices, which he personally delivered to Nepal to aid in the relief efforts. While there, he had the opportunity to witness firsthand the benefit of Rotary clubs, as there were several involved in bringing aid to the country, including our very own club. Sonam is a licensed doctor of podiatry and is the managing partner at Martin Foot and Ankle. And while in Nepal, he operated in a local orthopedic hospital and stayed there nearly 2 weeks, visiting hospitals, working with patients, providing supplies and care. The American Red Cross later honored him with the prestigious American Red Cross Hero Award. Sonam's family was originally from Tibet, but like many others fled under China's rule and settled in Nepal. But for many of his elementary and middle school years, he attended school in India. Sonam speaks 4 languages: Tibetan, Nepali, Hindi, and English. He came to the US in 1995 when he was 19 years old to attend university. He did his undergrad at Slippery Rock and medical school at Temple, and his foot and ankle residency was at Drexel University College of Medicine, Hahnemann University Hospital. He and his wife met in college, but they actually attended the same high school in Nepal, never knowing each other because Sonam was in the biology wing and his wife was in the physics wing. So it wasn't until they met at Slippery Rock in the International Studies program, and they were the only 2 from Nepal, so they were destined to meet, and the rest is history. The university remains very special to Sonam because not only did he meet his wife there, but his mentor, the head of the biology department, continues to be a close friend to this day. Sonam created a scholarship to be awarded to a student of biology at Slippery Rock. He serves on our club's charitable grants committee and is on the board of directors of the Charitable Endowment Fund. He and his wife have 2 boys, 11 and 7. They love to travel, and especially to Nepal every few years to visit family and trek the Himalayas. Thank you, Sonam, for demonstrating service above self. And now the best dressed Rotarian, Diane Marino, has a student education scholarship presentation followed by Love for Community announcement by Bill Anstein.
Thank you, President Jackie. This is my last time up here awarding a scholarship for the year. And it has been a lot of scholarships. I am so unbelievably grateful to this club. Today, we are awarding our last scholarship we have for the year, given $33,000 out in scholarships. And that is because of the generous, all of you. I mean, it's unbelievable between Al Hayes and Carol Wagman, Art Cayley, I mean, Fred Rosenmiller. It is incredible what you guys are able to give and do for these students. So thank you. I would also like to recognize very quickly the scholarship committee. If you would just stand real quickly, because I know most of us want to get out of here today. Please stand. Ellie, Fred, Debbie, any others? I don't see you here. Okay. Oh, hi, Dick. Okay, thanks, guys. And of course, I cannot tell you the amount of work that Renee Oberdick has done for this committee. The emails, the texts, the organizations of all the scholarships, it amazes me. I love you dearly. Thank you for everything. Okay, and now why we're here, and that is to honor Nicole, I'm going to get this right, Stockslager, Rachel, oh dear God, I'm so sorry. Rachel, it's my last one. I have to make it memorable. This is the scholarship that Al Hayes donated so generously in honor of his late wife, Donna. It is for equine science. Rachel blew us away during her interview. Hands down, she was the right candidate. Rachel is going to school at Sanitary University. She is scheduled to graduate May of 2023. She is studying equine science, and I am proud to present her with a $3,000 scholarship from L. Hayes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the York Rotary Club for this opportunity, and especially Al Hayes for presenting this scholarship and choosing me as the recipient. I'm really grateful for the opportunity that the scholarship provides me. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. President Jackie, fellow Rotarians and guests, your question is, what's with the music? For your information, I'm generally picked to make an announcement at this time on behalf of the fundraising committee. And I want you to put this date on your calendars. It's Monday, September 13. That's our biggest fundraiser. Because you have so many announcements week to week, I need to do something a little different. And that's why I use the theme song from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly to introduce my remarks. That, for the new members, is one of the most iconic film scores ever. It was a movie the same name starring Clint Eastwood back in 1966. To put it in perspective, in that year, Clint Eastwood was 36 years old. He's now 91. Personal note to put age in perspective, in 1953, Art Cayley was my band instructor at Mount Rose. And we had a good time together with a marching band. Usually at this point, I explain why I'm dressed in white. And it's because I represent the tennis segment of the fundraising committee. As you know, it's golf, tennis, croquet, and some other things. There's also a great banquet and of course the auction. But we point out that tennis is a pure sport. It embodies the principles of the Greek athletes. It involves fine athleticism, endurance, and speed. And we can't apply those terms to some of the other sports. And usually in a friendly rivalry, at this point, I usually tell a golfer joke. But because the passage of time and the compression, we're not going to be able to do that today. But if you come to the banquet, I'm going to have one for you then, the evening of the 13th. It's been said that in order to make your remarks memorable, of course, Diane did it another way, but you use quotations from Socrates or some philosopher in order to make your point. At this point, I'm going to refer to Confucius, who said, even a trip around the world begins with the first step. And many of you have not taken that first step. So at this point, you've got to get your brochure and start to consider what you're going to do on the 13th. Another famous quote is from Mark Twain, who said, never argue with an idiot. An onlooker may not be able to tell the difference. So what I'm saying is quit arguing with yourself, make a decision, decide if it's going to be golf or tennis, and sign up. And the third dignitary that I usually quote from is one who's very presidential and revered for his oratory and his mathematical skills. So in respect to our president, I'll leave you with these 3 words: sign up.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Diane. We'll miss seeing you for a while. And congratulations, Rachel. You have a very bright future. We're so delighted that you could be here today, and what a wonderful award. Next week, my boss is coming, so please show up and make me look good. I really, really would appreciate that. Next week, we'll hear from President and CEO Greg Miller of Penmar Human Services. This year marks the 40th anniversary of Penmar's ongoing mission to create transformative opportunities for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He'll offer an overview of the evolution of the organization and how they continue to provide support for an at-risk population. Our closing quote is by Rumi: "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop." Think about that. I hope you have a great rest of your week. We look forward to seeing you next week. This meeting is adjourned.